Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Resilient Advisor Show. My name is Jay Coulter, and joining me today is my regular guest, Lenore Hawkins, Chief Economist at Tematica Research. We're going to talk about her travels from the U.S. back over to Europe, and then, of course, everything related to the economy.
Our mission at Resilient Advisor is to have a significant impact on the retirement crisis by educating and empowering financial advisors to better serve their clients. We bring you industry thought leaders and experts to help you make a difference in the lives of your clients.
Are you struggling to hold your team accountable? Do you struggle getting them to see your vision and drive results? The Resilient OKR system for financial advisors could be your solution. OKR is an acronym for Objectives, which are your big inspirational goals, and Key Results, which are how you and your team are held accountable. This is the Silicon Valley method that drives growth at major companies such as Intel, Google, BMW, and Disney. Move your business results away from opinions and measure it with data.
Pick up your complimentary access to the Resilient OKR system for financial advisors by visiting resilientadvisor.com/OKR.
Lenore, thanks for coming back on the show. You've been a regular guest through the whole pandemic. We followed you as you started in Italy. You traveled back to the United States. Now you've gone back across the pond. Today you're in Ireland. What was traveling from the United States back to Ireland like?
Yeah, it's really interesting to have throughout this entire pandemic have home bases in 3 different countries, and to see as things progress, because every country, every country's had its moment of, hey, we're handling this great, and oh no, we're not handling this well at all, and then back to great, and then back to oh no. It was really interesting now, especially with the US having such success with ramping up the vaccination process. And thank you. I mean, it's lovely to see Biden, I think at this point, because he was planning to get 100 shots by his first 100 days, and it looks like he's going to probably be over 200 vaccination shots delivered within the first 100 days, to leave the US that's so ebullient and that is becoming so optimistic about this, and then travel into where flights are actually quite packed, then get on the flight in Dallas to fly to the UK. In London, Heathrow, there's only 2 terminals open, and it really is kind of post-Armageddon feeling there. Almost even though they've got just 2 terminals open out of the 5, almost every gate is locked down. And when you walk through there, all of the shopping, almost every single shop is locked down, closed. Really bizarre. Landing in Dublin, and almost the entire airport is locked down. Even the parking garages are almost completely empty. It's really post-Armageddon movie here, it's so surprising to leave the US and then come here and see that. And right now you've got Germany heading into another draconian lockdown, and Merkel's getting a lot of pushback on that. And Italy has moved into yet another, its most severe lockdown through at least post-Easter weekend. And yet the US, things are going great. So it's wonderful for the US, but investors need to keep in mind that it's not going as well everywhere. And that is going to affect stocks. It's not just a US thing. It's not just a US story.
Wow. So before we get into some of those details, let's get specific here. So you fly into DFW, and I'm hearing
on a full plane, completely packed plane.
In the airport, other than masks, right, and sanitation stations, it looks and feels like an economy that's opening up. You get on the plane, on the long plane ride. What is that, an 8-hour flight?
9.5. And that flight, so there was 1 person in first class. There was 5 people in business class, and less than 10, I'd say, in the rest in coach. I mean, it was stunning to see. There was in first and business class, you had more flight attendants. You had people on it, and then you land, and it is just empty and silent.
Huh. And then did you have to keep your mask on for the 9 hours generally?
Yes, the entire time. Now you can, they let you take it off to eat and drink, but it's a pretty quick thing. It's not that bad, because you do need to have a drink here and there.
Right. And you were spread out, I guess, because there are not a lot of people on the plane at this stage.
Yeah. So it wasn't actually, I mean, I don't, that flight, it was weird. The flight from San Diego to Dallas was terrifying because it's completely packed. You're just looking around going, okay, these are two areas that are not doing great. And everybody is literally jammed shoulder to shoulder. And they're packing people on. The whole like 6-foot distance was ridiculous on American Airlines. Thank you. They're jammed. I mean, people are piling on just normal, like it's 2019. And then when you get to Europe, it's even the way they board forget like the normal procedures for boarding. They board from the back of the plane and they only board like 5 to 10 rows at a time, depending on how many people there are. And it's a really methodical, they really enforce keeping everyone apart, which sounds great. But, and I love to see that. It makes you a lot more comfortable. But then you look at cases and, oh, hell, at this point, I don't know what works and what doesn't work, because there doesn't seem to be a correlation for a long time between how draconian the measures are and how successful they are at controlling it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We just need to vaccinate everybody.
We could do a whole show on what works and what doesn't work. But I'm curious. So you're in Heathrow. It looks shut down, and then you take, I assume, a puddle jumper over to Ireland. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, was that flight full?
That flight was maybe 20% full. So that one was still pretty empty. And when you land in Ireland, because now with Brexit, right, it's a very big deal, flying from the UK to Ireland. Dublin, that's a major airport. It's just empty. There's nothing. Like coming up to the custom or border control, there's no one there. There's no one in line at all. It's just, and everything's shut down.
How long have you been in Ireland? How many days?
A week in total.
A week in total. So are you allowed to go out and about in Ireland?
No, under quarantine. So I just go for like a little walk, but you can't go anywhere else. You're totally quarantined. Had a COVID test again today. I will end up with like 5 COVID tests over the course of like a week and a half. But had another one this morning.
So, got it. So you have to be quarantined after you travel over there, and then if you were out of quarantine, how open are the streets? How are shops, restaurants letting anybody in? What does it look like today in Ireland?
So they're on a pretty tight lockdown. No retail is open except for food and pharmacy, the usual. People are out walking around. And if you go to a local park, you see people walking around, and when they're outside, they're not wearing a mask. But every retail shop is closed. All restaurants are closed except for delivery or takeaway. That's it. So it's a very different world than in much of the US.
With the native Irish sense of rebellion and lack of desire to be oppressed, I would have thought them to be more like, Texas in the United States, and not put up with it from, a populist standpoint. It sounds like that's not the case. They were like that in the beginning. They were definitely like that. I mean, because all my family is here in Ireland. And if I start talking about Ireland too much, I start getting the accent back. But it was very much like that in the beginning here. But over time, it got so severe here, the infection rate, and a lot of families are very tight knit here, that people got really scared. It was similar to what happened in Italy, where the hospitals just became overrun, and the news is full of stories of doctors just not able to handle the wave of people coming in. Everybody got scared, and so back to lockdown. Although now, I would say that there's a lot more optimism with the vaccines, but there's also an unbelievable amount of frustration with how slow it's going. You look at the data between how much progress the United States is making and the European Union. The European Union is just so far behind. It's horrific. The UK is also doing a fantastic job, but the European Union is really slow. My mother, she'll kill me if I say her age, but let's just say she should be the first out after healthcare workers. She should be in the very first group. And she just got her first shot a week ago. Whereas I know, tons of people I know in the States have already had both shots. Yeah. Oh yeah. And not even folks over the age of 60 getting shots.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very, very different here. And I don't think it's going to be picking up anytime soon, because there's still so much the usual bureaucracy that you see. So I think the European Union is going to be very slow, which for American investors, that's something to think about, because where are you going to look? Like the United States economy, even though, and we can talk about this, it's not going fantastic. There's parts that are doing great, but it's going to be doing so much better more quickly than the US, but it will be affected than Europe, but it will be affected by how slow Europe is going.
Before we get to the economy, because you're not going to be on again for another month, can you give us some insight into what you're hearing about what it's like in Italy today? I know you're going back in a couple of days. What's their status?
So Italy they have color coding for the level of lockdown, and almost the entire country is now in red, fewer in orange, and red is back to everything except for food, and pharmacies are shut down completely. Restaurants can only do takeaway or delivery. And you're not allowed to go, I think it's out, you're not allowed to go outside of your little city. So literally, like if you're in Milan, you can only stay in Milan, and they have rules around even how far you can go from your home. So it's pretty draconian officially, but it's Italy and the Italians are freaking sick of it. This has been going on. I mean, I went through this level of lockdown year ago, and it's still going on, and the frustration is getting pretty intense with the Italian government. So to be honest, what I'm hearing is there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of formality. It's not really getting enforced. I think the police themselves are just done with it, and people are pretty much done with it. So they're kind of just doing whatever they want, which I think is a lot of what we saw in the US in many places. It's everywhere else is starting to get that way too. You cannot keep people down for this long. And the solution to everything cannot be, we're going into another lockdown, especially when you see such poor handling of the vaccine rollout.
Mm-hmm. Lenore, you and I have done a great job over the last couple of years of not interjecting politics into our discussions about the economy. Without interjecting politics, do you think that politics has something to do with the lockdown in Italy and where they are, or are their hospitalization rates to justify being at a red level right now?
The cases, the caseload, not the hospitalizations. I think it's the fear that if it goes out of control again, because if you look at the case count, it started really spiking up again. Now that they've gone lockdown, it's starting to roll over. It's mostly, I just think fear. I mean, there's a level of kind of PTSD in the healthcare community in Italy, because that was the nation that got hit first. I think when we look at what's going on in Italy as a whole too, you can't get away from the politics in that. So for those who don't know, Mario Draghi, who was running the European Central Bank, he's now been made the prime minister of Italy, which is effectively kind of like Italy's president. There is also a president in Italy, but the president of Italy has very different powers than the United States. So he's really the guy in charge. He just got put in charge, and hopefully things will go well because he has a lot of clout all over the world, and with Italy as well. Italy's very proud of Draghi. I think what he does not want to give the rest of the European Union an excuse to not help Italy out financially. So if Italy does not control the pandemic well and then turns around and says, hey guys, you need to give us more money to help the economy, that could be a more complicated conversation. So there's that balancing act, because Italy is one of the Mediterranean states that is chronic debt nation that pretty much is always slower than the North. The North has got the excess funds. The South has a lot of debt, and they're looking to the North saying, you got to pay. And they don't want to give them a reason to say, oh, you haven't been handling things well enough.
Excellent answer, leaving politics out of it. You're a pro. Perfect.
Try.
Our mission at Resilient Advisor is to have a significant impact on the retirement crisis by educating and empowering financial advisors to better serve their clients. In the new Resilient Advisor series, How I Serve, we interview top financial advisors who are making a difference in the lives of their clients.
Your partner's tuned into the broadcast. Old Chris Versace pipes in. Do it up, Lenore. Bring all that thematic and global macro goodness to the forefront of the conversation. Let's use that as the transition here. Let's talk big picture 2021. Yeah. What is your thinking today?
So I think it's really interesting to look at this market, take a step back. What is fascinating to me about this market is where we are on a global basis now. It's fits and starts, obviously, because of what's going on with the pandemic, but we're at the beginning of a business cycle, right? We've gone through a recession, and maybe we get a little bump along the way. There may be another quarter or so of contraction, but mostly we are at the beginning of another business cycle. And that's happening at the same time where we've got one of the most speculative markets in history. It's unbelievable the level of pricing. This is a really expensive market. We've never had that happen before. What you normally have is you get the beginning of a business cycle, and that's somewhere around when the market has crashed out, right? Those two tend to be a little bit more in line, not where you have one of the most expensive markets in history, right when the economy is starting to go. So this is new. This is a new game for us. I think one of the things that's also really interesting is seeing the difference between services and manufacturing. In the United States and in Europe, the manufacturing sector is starting to do really well. And there's some interesting things to think about with that. So the manufacturing sector is growing really strong all over the place. Just last night, we got flash PMI readings for manufacturing and services across much of Europe, and almost all of them from the manufacturing sector. They beat estimates, and some of them were some of the strongest we've seen in quite a while. That's great on the manufacturing side. On the services side, they were better, but there's still a lot of them still in contraction mode. Kind of obvious. It's a little bit difficult to have strong service sector when people have to stay 6 feet apart, and when you've got retail closed and all that. What's interesting on the manufacturing side as we look longer term is why is manufacturing doing so well? Well, what we've seen is that this pandemic pushed forward the adoption of a lot of technology that was already there, and there was plans to adopt it, but it had to be adopted a lot faster. And with that, I'm talking about automation. We saw the adoption of automation, massive pull forward on the manufacturing side, because what are you going to do? Can't have that many people in a manufacturing plant. They all got to stay far away. Really complicated to have them come in and clean. So you were planning to start automating your factory. Why not do it now? We've also seen it on the corporate side, right? Because you can't have all those people in the office. So this technology that can automate more and more of what you do, those all got adopted much more quickly. So when we look forward, think about that we've seen a lot of investment has been pulled forward, right? It's expected to happen over many years, and instead it happened very quickly. So is that going to be a long-term trend? Is this going to be kind of like the cash for clunkers, where we saw a huge spike in auto purchases because all the purchasing got pulled forward? And it also has some interesting implications for employment. Now, when we look at the employment situation, employment bottomed out in February of 2020. February 2020, we had 152.5 million people in the US workforce. So that was just before all of this nightmare started. The employment bottomed in April at 132.2 million. So that means we lost a little over 20 million jobs in the pandemic, which is an unbelievably large number. So just this last month, we're back up to about 143 million. So that means we've recovered a little bit more than all of the jobs that are lost. Yet, so there's all these people out of the workforce. And yet last week, we got a report from the Philadelphia Fed that was surveying people about their employment situation. And about a little over almost 65% of them said that they had a shortage in labor. So we've got a little over 9 million people still out of work, and yet companies are saying we can't find people. About almost 60% said there was a skills mismatch. About 45% said that they have job vacancies that have been open for more than 3 months. And this is something we'd seen this problem before the pandemic, but now we're seeing it even more harsh in that there really is this increasing mismatch between who's in the available pool of labor and what companies are looking for. So for investors, one of the things to be thinking about is that means that there's an enormous pool of people who need to retrain. And I don't think that's going to change. I think that's actually going to get worse. So an area of opportunity is going to be in those companies that can provide these retraining skills.
Mm-hmm. So let me unpack some of that right there.
Yeah.
So, and I did not give you this question in advance. There is a massive shift in my industry, and most folks listening to this are financial advisors. Massive shift of people who've worked for the big firms, who thought that they needed the big brand name, the big corner office inside Class A office space. Saying, after this past year, I've worked out of my house, or I've worked out in the suburbs. My, wealthy clients don't care where I work. And you know what? My firm really doesn't provide that much value. And when I say a big shift, my calendar is full of these advisors that want to learn about what it means to go out and go into business for themselves and not work for that company. And I'm sitting here thinking that has ramifications for office space, support staff. You talk about automation, a lot in the financial advisory world can be automated, and that eliminates jobs. And then on the other side of that, there is a human capital shortage as well. I have so many job openings in my network, and I'm not a recruiter, that I try and help people fill, from client service associates to trained financial planners, trained investment managers. And it speaks to what you're talking about in the microcosm of the financial advisory business. It has to be happening everywhere, Lenore, and that's going to have some really severe consequences.
And it's happening globally too, which is even more amazing to me. The world really has, oh God, you go to the grocery store in Ireland and you literally can find the exact same brand of oat milk that I can find in San Diego. So whatever's happening one place, it seems to be happening everywhere. I think you're absolutely right. And that is very much what's happening all over the place. And it's terrifying and also very exciting. One of the things I think that we saw from the pandemic is this boost in productivity, because we had all this technology that was possibly allowing us to be more productive, but productivity over the past decade has been kind of flat. It really hasn't improved. And remember, to grow an economy, you have to grow the labor pool. The only two things that grow an economy is a growth of the labor pool and growth of productivity. Productivity wasn't really moving. We've actually seen a burst in productivity during the pandemic because, oh God, how do we use all this technology? And people were bringing it on, which is fantastic. But it also, like you said, it's costing people some jobs, and then it's opening up new jobs. So there needs to be a lot of retraining. I think one of the things that the current administration could be focusing on is how to make that easier, how to get people to quit trying to find the jobs that don't exist for them anymore, and to look at something else and quickly get up to speed, get trained for these new positions, so that we don't have so many jobs that cannot be filled.
Mm-hmm. Jeffrey Grossman, appreciate you listening in. He says that he enjoys seeing Lenore and would like to see more of you. We hear that from viewers all the time, Lenore.
Thank you.
So let's shift to the markets. What are the implications for what you're seeing in the economy overseas and here as it relates to the markets and financial advisors that are building portfolios? So
we have seen this market is endlessly fascinating. Monday, we saw the VIX crash to the lowest level since February 21st, 2020. I mean, we have lockdowns starting again. You've got all this crazy volatility, what's going on in the bond market, and yet the VIX crashed. So what that says, if you're looking at building a portfolio with a crashing VIX, what a great time to put on a little bit of protection, right? Protection just got real cheap. And Tuesday, so yesterday, was the 1-year anniversary of the market's bottom post-pandemic crash, or during the pandemic crash. And yet here we are with the International Airline Group, which is the parent company of British Airways, down 15% from its high. American Airlines is down 9% from its high. JetBlue down 7%. You still got the cruise companies that they're really struggling. So what that says is, while they've come up a lot, now granted, they've come up from their bottoms a lot, we are not out of the woods yet. This is not going to be a super smooth. The US looks like it's going really well, but still, you never know. We can get these spikes, these variants, and the market has priced in basically, I think, all the good news. So I think it's going to be very tough going forward. What good news is really going to spike things up? We've even saw it with the Russell 2000 on Tuesday. It fell more than 3.5%. That was its worst day in nearly a month, and it's moved below its 50-day moving average for the first time since the end of October. So that tells you there's a lot going on. Those pandemic beneficiaries, the ones that skyrocketed, they've been reversing course a bit. Like Peloton's down 32%, Zoom's down 40% from their high, Snowflake down 44%. So that's all telling you that the market is, we don't have the opening boom, right? Because airlines are struggling. And we also don't have the pandemic lovers doing fantastic. They're down a lot. Mm-hmm. So that tells you the market's not really exactly sure what's going on. I think what we have seen also, this value to growth ratio has also seen value starting to pick up a little strength. Keeping an eye on that.
Finally.
finally, I mean, that's good God, how long has that been? I mean, that's like waiting for the sun to rise in the west to see value start catching on. But maybe this is it.
Yep.
What I think, another one that I think is really interesting actually is all of this talk about inflation, right? Because that is that value growth. Because if we're going to see these bond yields go up, that really has a negative effect on the tech sector, right? Which was the high flyers. So everybody's talking about, oh, inflation, inflation, inflation. Okay. Well, if you looked at last week's CPI report for February, and then look at the 3-month trend in core CPI, and I annualized that. Going back to last August, the 3-month trend in core CPI at an annualized basis was at 4.6%. Wow, that's high, right? By November, it had dropped from 4.6 to 1.8. Then by February, it had gone from 1.8 to 0.7. That's not screaming inflation to me. Now, where we are seeing inflation is obviously in asset prices. But I think this inflation concerns is really overblown. And that's not to say that we aren't going to see numbers that make it look like inflation. And that's really going to be because of base effects. I mean, if you think about what the world was like this time last year, I mean, it was utter terror. Everything was crashing. People were, houses on fire. I think we're going to see over the next couple of months data coming in that is going to be full of noise. It's not really going to be telling us exactly what's going on, because comparing year over year is going to be really ugly. So I keep that in mind when we're looking at the data, and don't try to not take too much out of that.
So let me push on inflation a little bit. And everybody has a different lens. You and I have talked about inflation numerous times over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
My food bill, my energy bill, gas, real estate in Atlanta, Georgia is outrageous, but the research shows it's that way all across the country. Medical bills, college education, which was a problem before the pandemic, and now hereafter they still want the same tuition for even less education. Like, that's what people are paying, and that's going up at a pretty sharp rate. So help an advisor that is trained to use CPI as an inflation gauge versus the real world and how they should look at that dispersion.
Right. So inflation is a tough one, right? Because everybody uses the word as if we all mean the same thing, and such a difficult thing to actually even pin down exactly what it means in any one context. So we're talking about house prices. Yes, we have seen house prices skyrocket, and that's part of, I think, we've overall seen asset prices. Like, one place we've definitely seen inflation is in the stock market. I mean, for God's sakes, look at 2020. We had the biggest economic contraction since the Great Depression in the 30s, and yet we had one of the strongest stock markets into all time. I mean, talk about asset price inflation, because where did the money go? The money just went into the stock market. Yes, we're seeing home prices going crazy, but that's more supply and demand, because the amount of supply on the market has been unbelievably small, while we're seeing this shift in preferences. Going back to your earlier comment about how many advisors are saying, do I really need this big name behind me? Do I really need to live in a major city and work for a major company that has this big brand name? Do I need all of that? And going into the AAA office space that costs a fortune, paying an insane amount on my mortgage because I'm living in this very condensed city. Do I really need that? You're seeing a lot of people moving around to where they want to live, and that's affecting the people are moving to where they want to live, yet there's not enough supply for that dislocation, for all the moving around that we see, because people who are moving to where they want to live, well, the people who are already there thinking, I pretty much like where I live, I'm not really sure I want to sell. So you're having that disconnect in the supply. But I will point out, though, that we're seeing a little bit in housing market, potentially, like, watch that, could be rolling over. The new home sales that just came out looks like,
rates have gone up, right? That has to have an impact on it. Yeah.
Exactly. New home sales fell 18% in February and are at a 9-month low. That was the sharpest one month decline since July of 2013. And rates are going up, so that's going to affect it. But this shift as well in people moving from I don't want to live in New York anymore in this tiny apartment and working, like you said, for the big company. I want to go live someplace where I like and where my kids can have a big old yard. That is not an ongoing, indefinite kind of a process, right? That's going to be kind of a disjoint, which is sort of what we're seeing right now in the global economy with like supply chains, and prices are astronomical, but it's not really inflation. For example, when you look at the supply chains all over the world, the cost of shipping in many places is 10 times what it was, say, 2 years ago. And that's because as this pandemic hit, boats, the container ships, they couldn't go into this port, or they had nothing to pick up. And so container ships didn't really have a lot of them. What were they going to do? Where were they going to go? So they're trying to find a place to just be parked because everything's coming to a crash, or they can't get in there because there's all these rules on who's allowed in because of, Australia is not letting people in. So you have the supply chains, you have these very smooth moves where ships would go from A to B to C, and this was a very consistent plan. All of that got thrown up in the air. So ships are not where they need to be. They're empty container ships where they don't need empty container ships, and where they need empty container ships, they're full container ships. Talk to anybody at a port all over the world, and you have got ships lined up, and it's taking forever to get things in because, again, we got this pandemic, so you can't have that many people in there. Checking everything has become much more complicated. Had to have Brexit in the middle of all of this just to make it even more interesting. So that's caused this massive spike. I think even Peloton sent an email out to their customers saying, we're so sorry, everything's so slow. But they were saying that their shipping costs are something like 100-fold of what they used to be. So that's going to have a big impact, but that's not a forever thing. Supply chains will get back to where they need to be. Prices will come back down. This is just, you can't stop the world economy for a bit and then start it again and not have a lot of kinks in the system.
Sure. Well, so listen, we are 30 minutes in, 10 minutes over. You and I always do this.
We always do this.
Right? You're a wealth of knowledge. I love having you on. Is there anything else that advisors should think about as we wrap up in terms of what's top of mind for you and what advisors should be considering before we speak again?
Few little things. One of the things to definitely keep an eye on, because it has a really strong correlation with the market, is looking at the City Economic Surprise Index, the CESI. It fell to a 9-month low. Is that continuing to go down? Is that going to turn around? That's something to keep an eye on because it does track real well with the S&P. The other thing to keep an eye on is what's going on with the jobless claims. We got surprised last week. It was supposed to hit a new low for the pandemic, but instead it actually rose. Are we seeing a turnaround there? We want to keep an eye on that. And I think the other thing to keep an eye on is the dollar, because the dollar, it had been very weak. It looks like it's starting to turn around. It's bucketed up against its 200-day moving average. If the dollar does break out above that and does kind of get a little bit of a run up, that's going to be a negative for commodities and for emerging markets. But with emerging markets taking a bigger step back on a longer term, I think the emerging markets have been priced so poorly for so long. I think there's quite a mega trend possibly setting up there. And keep in mind, look at India and the opportunities there, because India could very well be the next China.
We could do a whole show on that. India being the next China. Maybe we'll do that next time. Lenore, thank you so much for coming on. For more information about Lenore, her work in Tematica Research, visit tematicaresearch.com. That is tematicaresearch.com.